One of our Royal Caribbean blog writers, Allie, decided to try what it would be like to try to find the lowest, cheapest possible cruise out there and then report back what it was like. Here's a look at what Allie found up next. When someone says finding the cheapest cruise possible, of course, it's a relative term, and one person's cheap is another person's not so cheap. And when we talk about how to find a cheap cruise, of course, you might also be talking about, well, are we talking about the cheapest possible price out the door? Are we talking about the cheapest possible price per night? There's different considerations, and depending on the time of year, when you book, and how long of a cruise you're looking for, there are many different cheap cruises out there. Generally speaking, shorter cruises will cost you less out the door as in total price, but longer cruises, especially cruises beyond 7 nights, can oftentimes be cheaper in the per night cost.
There is nothing I love more than snagging a great travel deal, especially on cruises. Originally, I had a super cheap cruise booked in January that I unfortunately had to cancel because I caught COVID. With my future cruise credit in hand, I was on the hunt to find another cheap cruise. So how did I find my cheap cruise? Since I live in Florida, I was only interested in ports that were within driving distance. Currently, that includes Port Canaveral and Tampa, both of which are about 6 hours away from my house. I had a few weeks throughout April that I was available, so I filtered the cruise search to show me only cruises during that time frame. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to find a great deal or not, as it was pretty last minute and my search was fairly limited. I sorted the results by price low to high so I could find the cheapest fares first. Most of the time, the cheapest cruises are also the shortest ones. However, the sorting feature doesn't show you the cheapest price per night, but rather the cheapest total cost. This is an important distinction, as sometimes short cruises can have a higher nightly cost compared to longer sailings, but a higher daily cost on a shorter sailing can still provide an affordable vacation at the end of the day. Some of my options for a cheap cruise in April had affordable fares on a per-day basis, but most of these were 7-day sailings. I prefer to drive to the port the night before, so that turns into an 8-night vacation. Again, leaving my dogs last minute for 8 nights would be pretty tough logistically and financially. For this last minute sailing, I decided to look for something on the shorter side. This also gave me more flexibility to choose a sailing that was between 3 and 5 nights. I was open to sailings over the weekend or during the work week because I can work remotely.
When we talk about shorter cruises, inevitably, I think a lot of people look at them for the cheapest possible cruise that are out there. And the nice thing about a shorter cruise is you typically have a little more flexibility when it comes to what you can book. Generally speaking, short cruises are not booked up nearly as far in advance as longer sailings, and you can oftentimes find many more options for finding a really good deal.
One of the best options was a 4-night Bahamas getaway cruise out of Port Canaveral on Royal Caribbean's Mariner of the Seas. This fit my calendar nicely, and my sister was already flying down to visit on April 17th. The total cost was $499, which was down from the advertised price of $571 because of my Florida resident discount. This fare was for an inside guarantee stateroom, meaning I would be assigned at least an inside cabin, likely right before the cruise departed. The stateroom could be located anywhere on the ship. I've always had good luck with inside cabins, so I was totally fine with this kind of stateroom for the price.
Something I talk about all the time is the importance of booking your cruise as far out as possible. But if you book a last-minute cruise, which is really any cruise that's within the final payment date, so we're talking about 90 days beforehand, it's not impossible to manage, but there are a few more hurdles or things you have to account for in a short amount of time, especially things that aren't related to your cruise, but things to take care of: pet sitting, time off of work, and maybe coordinating some of your other plans during your regular part of your life.
Last-minute cruising deals can be great, but do require some flexibility and logistics that need to be sorted out quickly to make it work. Being able to drive to the port negated any consideration for airfare prices. My aunt and uncle live near Orlando, where we can stay the night before a cruise, which means we didn't need to consider the cost of a hotel. We also have great friends who are able to watch the dogs with only 2 weeks' notice. With everything falling into place, we pulled the trigger and booked our cheap cruise. My sister would be sailing with me as my cruise buddy. This was actually our first sister cruise.
So what is it really like when you're going on a cheap cruise? Well, it's a matter of, I think, of managing your expectations. And certainly when you're going on a cheap cruise, you're trading off the lap of luxury for prices saved, money saved in your wallet.
Since the cruise is relatively cheap, I expected the ship to be sailing at a low capacity. I figured with some basic economics that demand was low for this sailing, so Royal Caribbean was dropping the price to get more reservations booked. Most of my cruising in recent years has been on longer sailings and smaller ships. The other cruises I've done since the pandemic have been on ships that were sailing at 30 and 50% capacity. I also figured that most schools had already had their spring break. Since our sailing was Tuesday to Saturday, I assumed that the low cost was because most families couldn't sail during this time. In fact, I haven't sailed during the spring break time frame since my own college spring break back in 2016. Mariner of the Seas is a mid-sized cruise ship for Royal Caribbean, and it was recently refurbished. I was excited that our cheap cruise was on a cruise ship with some really fun additions and amenities. I figured a shorter sailing would be more of a party-like atmosphere than the other cruises I've done in recent years. Since we normally book inside cabins, I knew what to expect from the stateroom. However, I haven't booked a guaranteed inside cabin, meaning our cabin location could be anywhere. I assumed we would probably be located at either the front or back of the ship and potentially in a bad location, like under the pool deck or the nightclub. The day of our cruise, we were slotted for a 1:30 p.m. arrival. As we arrived at the port, Mariner looked like she was in great shape and felt even bigger than I remembered. Parking at the cruise port cost $85 for the duration of the cruise, while gas to the port had cost right around $75. We did not get there early enough to snag a spot in the parking ramp, unfortunately. This was actually my first indication that the cruise would be busier than I expected. Back in February, we were able to park much closer to the terminal when sailing on a bigger ship at a lower capacity. After checking in, we went to our stateroom to drop off our luggage and check out the room for the first time. We'd been assigned to cabin 8371, which was an interior stateroom almost at the back of the ship. This is what I had expected with our inside guarantee stateroom selection. Honestly, I was a little bit worried that we would feel more of the ship's motion that far back on the ship. I don't think I've actually had a cabin that far back on a cruise ship before. Although Mariner of the Seas had been recently refurbished in 2018, I'd argue that most of the renovation budget went to upgrading public spaces and very little went to upgrading cabins. These cabins looked exactly as I remembered from when I sailed on the same cruise ship in 2017. The decor was a little dated, but it actually oozed with nostalgia for us since we had sailed on Voyager-class ships a lot growing up. The cabin also had a couch, which was really nice to have because sometimes newer ships don't have sofas for inside cabins. There was plenty of storage with a large closet that had shelving on the side. There were 4 sets of drawers on both sides of the vanity, along with a mini cooler under the TV. We had more than enough space to unpack and get comfortable in the room. The room also had a hairdryer in one of the drawers and a safe above the TV, which also had even more shelving. The bathroom was very standard for a cruise bathroom with a small shower and toilet. Certainly not spacious, but everything you really need in a bathroom. There was a shelf under the bathroom sink for more storage and mirror panels that opened to uncover even more shelving for cosmetics and bathroom toiletries. Something that I've grown more accustomed to with traveling these days is having USB plugs in my room. On a recent trip to Europe, I didn't even need to use my converter because all of our rooms had USB plugs on the nightstand and desk. Our cruise on Harmony of the Seas, which is one of Royal Caribbean's newest ships, had USB plugs in the room as well. This is super nice because it allows for more charging and overall convenience. Honestly, it's something I kind of just expect to have these days when traveling. We had to constantly trade between charging our phones and laptops. It's a good thing my husband wasn't there with all of his electronics because we would be struggling to get everything charged without some sort of USB extender. Our beds were very comfortable and we both slept well throughout the cruise. We had them separated, which is similar to sleeping in a twin-size bed. Other than being slightly outdated with decor and electronics, our inside cabin felt spacious and had everything we needed for a place to sleep, change, and shower each day. We were overall pleased with the cabin and felt comfortable staying there throughout the cruise.
Will a cheap cruise be really crowded? Another consideration, and I think part of this answer is really depending on when you're answering this, because we're recording this video here in early 2022, and as things move back into quote-unquote normal, and you have cruises returning to normal, when you pick the cheapest possible sailing, you might also be getting a more crowded sailing, depending on a lot of factors.
To my surprise, this cruise was sailing with 3,000 passengers, which is nearly at 100% capacity. Because of the cruise's cheap pricing, I was convinced that the cruise would be sailing at a lower capacity. Again, to my surprise, there were tons of families and spring breakers. I guess our cruise was at the tail end of spring break season. I also hadn't considered that the Sunday before our sailing was Easter, so it was a holiday weekend as well. Here's a picture of the pool deck during the belly flop contest. It was actually pretty packed. With the ship sailing at full capacity, it was very busy. We didn't have any lines at the Windjammer, but there were lines at places like Cafe Promenade and Playmakers. Most of the onboard thrills like Skypad and Flowrider had lines too. We had to sit behind a pole at the ice show on the first night because we didn't get there early enough. I wouldn't say this dampened our cruise by any means, but I did feel the ship was slightly understaffed. For example, the servers at Playmakers said it would take 45 minutes to get a campfire cookie skillet, which was worth it. The first night's entertainment in the Royal Theatre was just playing a movie. Of course, this is an issue plaguing all industries right now, so I guess I should have expected there to be some sort of staffing issue on board. Another thing I didn't miss was the chair hogging that took place at some of the coveted spots, like the daybeds in the solarium. I normally love spending time in the solarium, but we had the hardest time finding a good spot. The bar was also packed in the solarium, so we didn't spend much time here at all.
What will dining be like on the cheapest cruise possible? Well, it depends on how much you want to spend beyond what you get out of your cruise fare.
Since our cruise was so cheap, we did choose to splurge on specialty dining a few times. We've always enjoyed our meals in the main dining room when cruising, but we've grown to appreciate the quality and experience of specialty dining in recent years. Before cruising, we purchased the Chops Plus One dining package. This was $75 each and included dinner at Chops plus a second specialty restaurant. Since Chops is $55 each, this meant that we could dine at a second specialty restaurant for only $20. On the first night, we dined at Chops Grill for a delicious 4-course steak meal. We had excellent service and great food. For our second and third nights, we opted to dine in the main dining room. To our dismay, our original table was being seated with 2 other couples that we didn't know. We were accommodated by the hostess to have a table where just the 2 of us could dine, which we appreciated. In the spirit of transparency, I didn't love that we were assigned to sit with strangers. Since the cruise was sailing at full capacity, I suppose they didn't have many options to accommodate everyone without seating strangers together. We did have great service both nights, and we enjoyed our experience regardless. In fact, we were in and out of the dining room in less than an hour both nights. This was actually perfect since we wanted to get to the shows earlier to snag better seats. On our final night, we had an amazing dinner at Jamie's Italian. The food was very fresh and we could tell the pasta was homemade. I did feel like the food was better on board Harmony of the Seas back in February, but this was still delicious, and we also had great service. One of the best things we ate during our cruise was the campfire cookie at Playmakers. Although it cost $7, this was absolutely worth it to enjoy its ooey gooey chocolatey goodness. The Bamboo Room was another spot that we loved, and we went there 3 of the 4 nights of our cruise. The atmosphere was very tropical, and we loved the tiki-themed cocktails. We also enjoyed getting to know the bartenders here. Each morning we had breakfast at the Windjammer Buffet, and we were pleased with the food options and quality. Surprisingly, we didn't have any issues finding a table each morning, but that could be because we were only looking for a table to accommodate 2 of us.
So what kind of itinerary will you get if you go on a really cheap last-minute cruise? Well, let's talk about that some more.
The original itinerary had stops in Nassau and Coco Cay, Bahamas, with 1 day at sea. Upon arrival in our stateroom, we found a letter that our sea day would be replaced with a maintenance stop in Freeport, Bahamas. This was a welcome change for us since we could choose to stay on board as scheduled or go ashore to a new port that we've never visited. We opted to walk around the port area and enjoy most of our day on board, as we had originally planned. If you followed our live blog, you'll know that our visit to Freeport was eventful when Mariner of the Seas was actually struck by a cargo ship in port. Luckily, this did not impact our sailing further, but it certainly caused some commotion on board. Our second port was Perfect Day at Coco Cay, which we were very excited to have a relaxing beach day at Royal Caribbean's private island. We enjoyed chicken sandwiches at Snack Shack, drinks in Oasis Lagoon, and a visit to the floating tiki bar in South Beach. Coco Cay is a great stop because it feels like you're at an all-inclusive resort. Everything is conveniently located, and there's already so much included. Of course, you can spend extra and have a private cabana or ride the wild water slides, but for those of us cruising on a budget, we can still have a great day without spending anything extra. The final port for our cruise was Nassau, Bahamas. For this day, we opted to spend a little extra to spend the day at Riu Palace using Resort for a Day. This gave us unlimited drinks and food with access to the resort's main pool, infinity pool, swim-up bar, and private beach. For $100 each, this was a relaxing way to spend our day. The resort was a short 10-minute drive from the port and located on Paradise Island next to Atlantis. The taxi's cost was $30 round trip. The only thing I would consider in the future when doing another resort day pass is the amount of time you actually have in port and how long you can use your resort pass for. Our pass was valid from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., but we were actually only in port from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. I do not risk being late to the ship, so we really only had from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the resort, only utilizing 4 of the 8 hours we actually paid for.
So now we've broken everything down, let's find out the overall cost of the cheapest cruise Allie could find.
Overall, we had a phenomenal cruise vacation, especially considering the price we paid. Because our cruise fare itself was so cheap, we did treat ourselves to specialty dining and the all-inclusive resort pass in Nassau. The resort pass was $130 each, including tax and the taxi ride from the port to the resort. Our specialty dining was $75 each, making those extras cost around $205 for each of us. Gas round trip for my house was $130, and parking was an additional $85, which adds $107 to the total cruise cost. Gratuities for this cruise were $58 per person, although we did tip some servers and bartenders a little bit extra. With our base cruise costing $250 each, the total cost with gas, parking, gratuities, specialty dining, and the all-inclusive resort was right around $620. It would have been easy to still have a great cruise on a budget without specialty dining and the all-inclusive resort. When booking a cheap cruise fare, you have more wiggle room to spend money on the things that you enjoy. It's always good to consider the extras that come with cruising that aren't included in your cruise fare. And for us, that was the gas, gratuities, and parking at the terminal. I wouldn't hesitate to book another cheap cruise last minute. It was a great getaway, and it has convinced me that vacation really is a state of mind.
This has been Matt and Allie from RoyalCaribbeanBlog.com, and we'll talk again real soon.